What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden, and in this episode we're going to be covering a very embarrassing and borderline slanderous study that just came out of the University of Calgary, and it's been used and cited in numerous articles in Canada for being a study that proves that there are certain commentators online who are Putin puppets, that they have links to the Kremlin. Now, the study doesn't actually say that, but that is these headlines that are coming out that are linking people like Richard Medhurst, who just covered this, Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate, they're all implicated in this study, which is just propaganda wrapped up and packaged as a study. This is an embarrassment, and what it actually says in the study there's no paper trail, there's no money linking these people to the Kremlin. All that happened was that these students, who probably wrote this the night before, they discussed 5 criteria that they used and cross-referenced that if you ever use these 5 talking points about Ukraine, some of them don't even have to do with Russia. If you ever tweeted about them or talked about them on social media, you get assigned a certain amount of points to your system or to your name, and then that makes you a Putin puppet. So there's no paper trail, nothing actually links these people to Russia in any way, shape, or form. All they did was cross-reference arbitrarily decided upon talking points, one of which is if you've ever said that NATO is causing a proxy war in the Ukraine and it's designed to bleed Russia, you get points given to your name if you've ever said that. I say that all the time. That's absolutely true. And a lot of these things are true, the criteria that they decided. Yet if you've ever said them on your show, they say that you're a Putin puppet. And that's why you get a whole bunch of truth tellers who are trying to give you the correct and, in fact, a dissenting opinion point of view about Ukraine and Russia right now as Putin puppets. Some of the criteria don't even have to do with Russia. It's embarrassing. Like, one of the criteria, and I'll read them to you, you're going to laugh out loud when you see them. One of the criteria is, like, if you ever instilled distrust in the Canadian government. Bootlicker says, what? So these kids didn't do their homework. This would get an F. Whoever the editor at this publication should be ashamed of themselves. This should be retracted. It's borderline slanderous. And the people that ran with this study, who either didn't read it or misinterpreted it purposely and ran with headlines like, oh, there's Canadians being targeted by Russian disinformation. Here's a list of Russian-linked Twitter accounts, when there is no actual Russian link to these Twitter accounts nor these people. That's slander. You have to have some evidence or a paper trail, money trail, something that shows that that's actually true. The study and the publication and then the articles that came out after citing this study and publication should all be ashamed of themselves. Anyway, someone who does not have to be ashamed of themselves is the dissident, who wrote a fantastic article right here, which we're about to read. The Canadian media has been fear-mongering over supposed Russian disinformation targeting Canadians. CTV News ran an article titled, "Canada Target of Russian Disinformation with Tweets Linked to Foreign Powers." Again, there's no link. There's no link. All they did was cross-reference these 5 criteria, which I will read to you. If you've ever said anything that are in these 5 criteria, you get points assigned to you. That's not a link. That's not a link. They don't have any receipts. So, the National Post ran an article titled, "Canada Target of Russian Disinformation with Tweets Linked to Foreign Powers." You notice that all of these are exactly the same or very, very similar headlines. It's like they all got a memo from up on high and just copy-pasted. The Global News ran an article titled, "Calgary Study Finds Canada Has Been Targeted with Russian Disinformation with Tweets Linked to Foreign Powers." All of these articles are based on a study from the University of Calgary that I will debunk in this article. The articles on this study in the Canadian media claim this study shows that Russia is intentionally targeting Canada with misinformation, but this is not what the study says at all. The study does not show Russian accounts targeting Canada, but instead provides a list of journalists and commentators, mostly in Canada, the US, and the UK, that dissent from the mainstream orthodoxy on Ukraine. So basically, this study is propaganda dressed up as a study, which is, I have to admit, pretty clever. And I think that that's something we may be seeing a lot of in the future. The corporate media propaganda apparatus is very, very well-funded, it's sophisticated, and evolves as time goes on. And the more that we destroy the mainstream narrative, which we have done now effectively in Ukraine, because now even the heads of state are coming out and higher-ups are admitting that that Ukraine is not going to win that war, when they've been saying for the last 4 months that Ukraine is in fact winning this war. Yeah, all the people that were telling you that Ukraine had no chance and who were right, a lot of them are on this list, which is probably why they're being targeted like this via a study. This list includes many prominent journalists and commentators. Many of them, such as Glenn Greenwald, John Pilger, and Aaron Mate, have won awards for their reporting. The study gets basic facts about these reporters incorrect. For example, this chart claims John Pilger is based in Canada when a basic Google search shows that he's based in Australia. The study has Ben Norton's location listed as international when it is easy to find he is based in Latin America. So these kids didn't do their homework. That's what happened, and this got published anyway. Shame on whoever the editor is that allowed this to be published. It must be part of Rachel Maddow's family or something. This is bloody shameful. Shameful. The article gives no evidence at all that Russia is spreading disinformation in Canada, but instead lists 5 narratives that it deems as Russian disinformation and attacks accounts that he claims are parroting these narratives. The 5 narratives that the authors of the study claim are disinformation are not only perfectly legitimate opinions, but mostly factually true. The study claims the 5 narratives of Russian disinformation are as follows. 1. Implying that NATO expansionism legitimizes the Russian invasion. This itself is a straw man, as most of the people listed in this study do not argue that NATO expansion excuses Russia's invasion, but instead argue that it led to the invasion. Crushed. Drop the mic. I'm going to read that again. This itself is a straw man, as most of the people listed in this study do not argue that NATO expansion excuses Russia's invasion, but instead argue that it led to the invasion. I watch Glenn Greenwald, Richie Medhurst, a lot of the other people that are on this list, Ben Norton. Nobody has been advocating for the Russian invasion. So again, huge straw man. You can tell that this is written by, some 20-year-olds. And if it was written by anybody older than that, they should be even more ashamed, because the only people that should be able to get away with this are people that don't know how to do journalism, but are just instead trying to confirm their bias. This argument has been made by many foreign policy experts from across the political spectrum. Anti-imperialist scholar Noam Chomsky, who is the most cited living academic, has said, quote, "The expansion of NATO with Ukraine joining is a strategic threat to Russia, which any Russian leader would react to. This is well understood." Realist scholar John Mearsheimer has argued and said that the Russians are reacting to the West's attempt to make Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border, and that from the Russian point of view, this is categorically unacceptable. It represents an existential threat, and that is what has precipitated this crisis. Even Henry Kissinger has argued that NATO expansion would lead to conflict between the West and Russia, as well as conflict between Russia and Eastern Europe. Yeah, Henry Kissinger, that Putin apologist, that Putin puppet, according to this criteria right here from these goofballs. Number 2. If you've ever portrayed NATO as an aggressive alliance using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. Higher-ups are now admitting that this is the case. Hillary Clinton's been saying this since the beginning, that we should do it. That's Seth Moulton. He mentioned Seth Moulton later. They've all admitted that this is actually the case. This is not disinformation. This is information. To deny NATO is an aggressive alliance is to deny reality. NATO destroyed Libya based on lies, bringing slave trade to the once prosperous African country. NATO invaded and occupied Afghanistan for 20 years, all the time lying about the gains they were making. NATO killed 500 civilians with their bombing campaign in Serbia. On the claim of NATO using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia, this is something multiple U.S. government officials have admitted that they're doing. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff has said the U.S. arms Ukraine, quote, so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here. Democrat Seth Moulton said, quote, we're fundamentally at war, although through a proxy with Russia, and it's important that we win. Senator Joe Manchin has said that the U.S. goal is to eject Russia from Ukraine entirely and eventually remove Putin from power. Democratic House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer said, quote, we're at war with Russia. Number 3, this is so funny. Number 3, if you've ever promoted a general mistrust in institutions and elites. Excuse you? If you've ever, like Russell Brand style stuff, he's not even political. And he's like, yeah, you shouldn't trust the higher ups. He's a Putin puppet now. Let me read to you this again. if you've ever promoted a general mistrust in institutions and elites, you might be a Putin puppet. And I love the reaction here from leftist news. This one is just ridiculous. All journalists should be skeptical of institutions and elites. This one is just too ridiculous to warrant a response. Yeah, basically it's like that scene in at the end of Billy Madison, where he's just given the stupid-ass response, and then he's getting graded by the guy that's, you know, the watching the debate and seeing who wins. He's like, yeah, that response made no sense. Everybody in the room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. Number 4, if you've ever suggested that Ukraine is a fascist state or has extensive fascist influence. Now, we know factually that there was the Maidan coup in 2014 to install a more fascist leader who was more aligned with the West over Yanukovych. Now, that's not the main thing, though. My main argument is that we already know that the Azov Battalion and C-14 and numerous other right-wing extremist factions who are Nazis are actually deeply embedded in the Ukrainian fighting forces. This has been well documented. You can see hundreds of pictures of these guys with swastikas on their chests and on their arms, tattooed all over their faces, and that they run a lot of the military operations that have been going on in this war. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. But if you say it, you're a Putin puppet. The idea that Ukraine is a fascist state could be fairly described as false, but the fact that Ukraine has extensive fascist influence is undeniable. Exactly right. It is so undeniable that even the pro-NATO think tank the Atlantic Council has acknowledged that Ukraine has a problem with far-right violence and that the state has done nothing to prevent it. Foreign Policy magazine has reported that, quote, a sizable portion of Kiev's current government and the protesters who brought it to power are indeed fascists. Like I said, the Maidan coup, only 2 or 3% of the people that participated in it were the Azov and affiliated, C-14 Nazi thugs. But they're so hyper-violent and so ideological that they were able to be like the engine that drove the coup. So denying that is denying reality. The influence of the far right in Ukraine is so extensive that they successfully threatened the Ukrainian president to back off from implementing the Minsk Accords, a main promise of his campaign. Number 5. Promoting a specific mistrust of Canada's Liberal government, especially Minister Trudeau. So if you've ever said a bad word about dear leader, if you distrust your leaders, you are a Putin puppet, according to their criteria. This is super embarrassing for this publication. Just beware. This should be immediately taken down. I'm just saying. This is, like I said, this is a study that is basically just slander dressed up as a study. Similar to the third point, this is something that all journalists should do. The mainstream Canadian press consistently questions the Liberal government on issues such as the SNC Lavalin scandal and the WE charity scandal. According to the Canadian press, according to this, the Canadian press is parroting Russian disinformation, by questioning their government. The study conclusion goes on to list a series of other claims that they factored into what constitutes Russian disinformation. Like the previous 5, they are all factually correct. They include... Now, before we even go on, you notice that this 5th one and the 3rd one don't even have anything to do with Russia? Promoting a general mistrust in institutions makes you Russia... That had nothing to fucking do with Russia. And promoting a specific mistrust of Canada's Liberal government, specifically Trudeau... It has nothing to do with Russia. So funny, man. This is awful. This is awful. This is so fucking embarrassing. Anyway, here's some other ones. They include the West is propping up fascists in Ukraine. The United States has admitted that they don't know where most of the weapons that they've just given to Ukraine are going. And we know that a lot of the brigades that are left over are Azov or that are Nazi affiliated. So we know that these Nazis are getting a hold of our guns. We know that. This is undeniable. Mainstream Canadian media has reported that Canada's military trained neo-Nazis within Ukraine's military. The Nation magazine in 2016 reported that the U.S. Congress removed a ban on weapons going to the neo-Nazi Azov battalion in Ukraine after pressure from the Pentagon. Another one is the West has no moral high ground to condemn the invasion. I've said that multiple times in my show. There's really... The United States and really NATO has no moral high ground to say anything about any of this stuff. But anyway, last one here. Nations such as Canada, the US, and the UK are trying to force Europe into this conflict to benefit materially. Well, we already know that the big oil manufacturer, or the big oil producers here, are doing well, and basically the weapons manufacturers are making a killing off of this, because basically Ukraine was kind of a money laundering operation to get clean money into the pockets of the weapons manufacturers. The United States Congress votes for $54 billion to go to Ukraine, and they end up using that money to just buy weapons from us. And then we just send them weapons on top of it as well. So this is an embarrassing study. I highly recommend you read the whole article from The Dissident. But this is what they're going to try to do now, guys. This propaganda apparatus in this country and in all NATO countries is highly sophisticated. It's ever mutating and evolving, and right now this is effectively a study that is just a hatchet job, a study from a journal article. And I think we can expect to see this a lot in the future from pseudo-intellectuals and students, and we have to be vigilant in taking it down, make sure that we take it all apart. This is so patently absurd, like on face value, this was easy for me and The Dissident. Highly recommend you read the whole article. I only read half of it to you. And go to his Substack, The Dissident, on Substack, and sub. He does fantastic work. So keep fighting that good fight out there, guys. This is shameful. These people should be ashamed of themselves. See ya.